The ticket machine stuttered its mechanical rhythm against the stainless steel pass. 3 sharp bursts of noise that usually signaled the lunch rush beginning. But this was breakfast, and the diner was still waking up. Then the voice drifted over the counter, low, gravelly, and far too comfortable. "Thanks, sweetheart." At the cutting board, Rosalie went absolutely still. Her Santoku knife, usually a blur of motion dicing chives, hovered midair. The rhythmic chop, chop, chop that defined the sonic landscape of our kitchen vanished instantly, replaced by a silence so sudden and violent it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. She didn't look at the ticket. She didn't look at the chives. She looked at me. And in that terrifying, electric stillness, the year of carefully maintained professional distance didn't just crack, it evaporated. To understand why that silence felt like a physical blow, you have to understand the noise we usually lived in, or rather, the quiet we shared before the world woke up. 4 a.m. in a commercial kitchen is a specific kind of intimacy. The city outside is dead, nothing but gray mist and empty pavement. But inside, the diner breathes. It's the low, industrial hum of the walk-in refrigerators, the rhythmic cycling of the compressors, the scent of yeast rising from the dough proofing in the warm corner, mixing with the sharp chemical bite of lemon sanitizer. It was a private world, a bubble of suspended time that belonged only to us. Rosalie never just walked into the kitchen. She arrived, 4:15 a.m. sharp, every single morning. The heavy steel back door would groan on its hinges, followed immediately by the specific, authoritative click of her boots on the quarry tile. She moved with a terrifying economy of motion. I would watch from the coffee station, measuring out the dark roast as she tied her apron. It was a ritual. She didn't just put on a uniform, she armored herself. The strings pulled tight at the waist, the white linen smoothing over black chef's trousers, the way she rolled her sleeves to exactly the elbow, revealing forearms that were strong and scarred from years of burns and blade slips. She carried a heavy silence with her, not the awkward silence of strangers, but the focused, intense silence of a predator entering its territory. My role was prepping the front, wiping down counters that were already clean, brewing the first pots of coffee, setting the mood. But really, my role was to be the other half of the equation. We were the only 2 people awake in the city, or so it felt. I'd bring her a mug of coffee, black, no sugar, strong enough to wake the dead, and set it on the pass. She wouldn't say thank you, not with words. She'd just nod, a sharp dip of her chin, and take a sip, her eyes already scanning the line for imperfections. Her perfectionism wasn't a trait. It was a physical force. It charged the air between us. One morning, about 3 months in, she walked out from behind the line while I was rolling silverware at the counter. The kitchen was her domain, the floor was mine, and she rarely crossed the border. But she walked straight to table 4, her boots heavy on the linoleum. She stopped, staring down at the table setting I had just finished. The silence stretched, tight and heavy. She reached out, her hand hovering over the sugar caddy. Her fingers were long, calloused, capable. She rotated the ceramic container exactly 3 degrees to the right. "Alignment," she murmured, her voice rough with sleep. She didn't look at me, though she was close enough that I could smell sage and garlic mixed with vanilla warmth. She looked up then, and her gaze held mine, unflinching. Precision is a form of respect. The air between us thickened, heavy with what we didn't say. I felt the heat of her proximity, the weight of her attention shifting from the table to me. For a moment, I thought she might reach out again, might correct my alignment the way she corrected the table. But then she turned, the moment snapping shut, and marched back to her station. That was our dance. The quiet, the tension, the unspoken pull of gravity between the front of the house and the back. It was a delicate ecosystem, balanced on the edge of a knife. Then, inevitably, the spell would break. The sun would crest over the buildings across the street, painting the diner floor in harsh, unforgiving squares of yellow light. The delivery trucks would start to rumble in the alley. The bubble would pop. But for those 2 hours in the dark, she was mine, and I was hers. even if we never said a word about it. The shift from our private, pre-dawn sanctuary to the kinetic violence of prep was never gradual. It was a detonation. The moment the industrial gas burners ignited with a collective, breathy whoosh, the atmosphere in the kitchen transformed. The air, previously cool and smelling of dormant yeast, suddenly thickened, turning heavy with the rising heat and the aggressive, savory complexity of reducing sauces. It was a physical weight that pressed against us, condensing the space, forcing us into a proximity that felt less like professional necessity and more like a gravitational collapse. We moved into the dance, the impossible physics of two bodies navigating a 30-inch aisle without colliding. I would slide past her to grab the heavy cream, back arching to avoid the flat top, while she pivoted with a sauté pan, missing my hip by a fraction of an inch. "Behind," she would murmur, her voice dropping an octave to cut through the exhaust fan's drone. It was a safety warning, a standard kitchen command, but in the charged, humid air between us, it felt like a secret. The vibration of her voice against my spine was a tactile sensation, a ghost of a touch that lingered long after she had moved away. We developed an uncanny telepathy that exists only between people who share a confined space for too many hours. I stopped asking what she needed. I just knew. I could feel the rhythm of her station falter, seconds before she ran out of clarified butter. I would have the ramekin in my hand, extending it over the pass, just as her hand reached out blindly to grab it. Our fingers would brush, a fleeting, accidental friction of skin against skin that sent a jolt of static electricity straight to my chest. She wouldn't look up, wouldn't acknowledge the spark that made my breath hitch, but I saw the way her hand paused for a microsecond, her fingers tightening around the ceramic before she snatched it away. The tension wasn't just in the movement, it was in the stillness between the beats. There were moments when the rhythm broke, when I would turn from the coffee grinder to find her watching me. She wasn't inspecting my prep or checking the clock. She was just watching. Her gaze was heavy, a physical pressure that traced the line of my neck or the movement of my hands as I arranged napkins. It was a look of intense, starving curiosity, stripped of her usual professional armor. When our eyes met, she didn't look away in panic. She held the contact, unflinching, letting the silence stretch between us until the air felt too thin to breathe. Then she would blink, the mask would slam back into place, and she would turn back to her reduction, the set of her shoulders rigid and unyielding. It was a game of chicken, played with glances and near misses, a dangerous escalation of intimacy that we pretended wasn't happening. We were building a pressure cooker, sealing the lid tight and turning up the heat. And then the front door lock tumbled. The heavy, metallic clack-clack of the deadbolt sliding back echoed through the dining room, shattering the charged atmosphere instantly. The first customer pushed the door open, the bell chimed, and the private, electric world we had built in the steam and the noise evaporated, replaced by the mundane reality of the morning rush. If the pre-dawn hours were a waltz, the breakfast rush was a riot. It didn't start gradually. It crashed over us like a rogue wave. By 8 a.m., the diner was no longer a place of business. It was a battlefield operating at maximum capacity. The acoustic landscape shifted from the hum of the refrigerator to a cacophony that assaulted the senses from every angle. It was the clatter of heavy ceramic plates hitting the laminate tables, the hiss of steam escaping the espresso machine, the roar of the exhaust hood fighting a losing battle against the smoke of 50 pounds of bacon, and the incessant machine gun stutter of the ticket printer vomiting orders onto the pass. The air grew thick, almost chewable, layered with the scent of searing grease, burnt sugar, and the sharp metallic tang of adrenaline. I was no longer a person. I was a blur of motion, a conduit for caffeine and carbohydrates. I moved through the dining room with a tray balanced on one shoulder, dodging patrons and weaving through the chaos, my mind a frantic catalog of needs. Table 6 needs hot sauce. Table 2 is waving for the check. The guy at the counter is tapping his mug for a refill. It was the kind of pressure that breaks people, the kind of chaotic entropy that turns competent workers into weeping messes in the walk-in freezer. But in the center of the hurricane, there was Rosalie. While the rest of us scrambled, she became terrifyingly, unnaturally still. She didn't speed up. she slowed down time. She stood at the pass, the captain of a ship in a gale, and she didn't just cook, she conducted. The kitchen chaos broke against her back and dissolved. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. In a room full of noise, her voice dropped to a register that cut through the din like a serrated blade. "Ordering," she would say, her tone flat and absolute. 2 scrambles, whiskey down, 1 Benny, sauce on the side. Walking in, she moved with a lethality that was hypnotic. I found myself pausing at the pickup window, tray in hand, just to watch her for a split second longer than necessary. It was competence porn, pure and simple. I watched her flip 3 omelets in succession, the movement of her wrist a snap of pure kinetic efficiency, wasting 0 energy. She plated food with the muscle memory of a surgeon, her fingers arranging garnish, while her eyes were already reading the next 3 tickets on the rail. Sweat gathered at her temples, making stray strands of dark hair cling to her skin, and the heat flushed her cheeks a deep, reactive crimson. But her hands never shook. Not once. There is a specific kind of attraction that is born not from romance, but from witnessing absolute mastery. Watching Rosalie run the line did something visceral to me. It wasn't just that she was good at her job. It was the authority she wore like a second skin. When a line cook started to flounder, burying himself in the weeds on the grill station, she didn't berate him. She simply stepped into his space, her body pressing briefly against his, as she took the tongs from his hand. "Breathe," she commanded, flipping a burger he was about to burn. "Reset. You're driving the bus. Don't let the bus drive you." She handed the tongs back, and he calmed down instantly, anchored by her gravity. That was the power she held. She stabilized the world around her. And God help me, I wanted to be stabilized. I wanted that focus, that intense, unyielding attention turned on me. I wanted to be the thing she was trying to perfect. Every time she slid a plate onto the pass and called service, looking at me with those dark, demanding eyes, I felt a jolt that had nothing to do with the caffeine I was inhaling. It was a pull, undeniable and dangerous, a desire to provoke that composure, just to see what lived underneath it. The rush peaked around 9:30, a fever pitch of noise and motion where we were all operating on pure instinct. Then, suddenly, the rhythm changed. The ticket machine paused for a breath. The roar of the dining room softened. I was wiping down the counter near the register, breathless and high on the survival of the morning, when the front door chimed. It wasn't the frantic chime of a hungry group of tourists. It was a leisurely, confident entrance. I looked up, wiping a stray hair from my forehead, and saw her. Vanessa. She walked in not like a customer, but like she owned the lease, bringing with her a cloud of expensive floral perfume that cut right through the smell of bacon grease. She didn't wait to be seated. She glided straight to the counter, right in front of the open pass where Rosalie was scraping down the grill, and flashed a smile that was all teeth and charm. The atmosphere in the kitchen didn't just shift, it curdled. Vanessa wasn't just a customer. She was an event. She was one of those women who move through the world as if gravity had negotiated a special contract with her. Lighter, louder, and assuming everyone wanted to be in her orbit. She slid onto the stool closest to the pass, the one spot that offered a direct line of sight into the kitchen's expo station. It was the danger zone, the exact intersection where the chaotic energy of the dining room met the rigid discipline of Rosalie's line. And Vanessa occupied it with the casual arrogance of someone who had never been told no in her life. She didn't just order coffee, she curated an interaction. She leaned over the formica, her elbows resting on the sticky surface, invading the operational space of the service area. "You look absolutely wrecked, babe," she crooned, her voice projecting just loud enough to carry over the hiss of the espresso machine. It was meant to be sympathetic, charming even, but in the ecosystem of the diner, it felt like a violation. She leaned in, her manicured fingers tapping the counter as I set a napkin down. It was unnecessary and performative, a claim staked on territory that wasn't hers. Behind me, the atmosphere shifted. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees in a single second. I didn't have to turn around to know that Rosalie was watching. I could feel her gaze burning into the space between my shoulder blades, heavy and physical. The rhythmic chop, chop, chop of her knife work, which had been a steady, comforting metronome all morning, suddenly accelerated. It wasn't just faster, it was harder. The blade was hitting the cutting board with a violence that felt personal. Thwack, thwack, thwack. It was the sound of controlled fury being channeled into the prep work, a staccato warning signal that I felt vibrating in my own teeth. I tried to maintain the professional mask, smiling that tight customer service smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Just the morning rush, Vanessa. You know how it is. I pulled my arm back, a subtle retreat, creating distance. But Vanessa didn't understand subtle. She leaned further in, crossing the invisible barrier of the counter, her face invading my personal space. She smelled of expensive jasmine and entitlement, a cloying sweetness that clashed with the sharp, clean scent of the kitchen sanitizer. You work too hard, she insisted, her eyes dropping to my hands, then back to my face, ignoring the boundaries I was trying to erect. You need someone to take you away from all this grease for a few hours. The sound behind me changed. The chopping stopped abruptly. The noise died instantly. I risked a glance over my shoulder. Rosalie stood at the cutting board, her back rigid, the line of her spine stiff as a steel rod. She wasn't looking at the prep. She was staring at the wall, her jaw set so tight I could see the muscle feathering beneath the skin. She refused to look at the front of the house, refused to acknowledge Vanessa's existence, but her entire posture screamed of a predator restraining itself from lunging at the bars of a cage. She picked up a sauté pan and slammed it onto the burner. The metal-on-metal clang rang out like a gunshot, startling a couple in a nearby booth. It was a warning shot, a declaration. Vanessa blinked, startled, looking past me into the dark recesses of the kitchen. Touchy, she laughed, oblivious to the fact that she was poking a sleeping tiger with a very short stick. She turned her attention back to me, her smile widening, her voice dropping to that conspiratorial, intimate register that signaled she was about to cross a line she couldn't uncross. She pushed her empty mug toward me, her fingers deliberately brushing mine again, lingering, claiming. The air around the pass crackled, thick with static and the scent of impending disaster. The disaster didn't arrive with a shout or a crash. It arrived with a request for a refill. I reached for the coffee carafe, the glass hot against my palm, and moved to top off Vanessa's mug. It should have been a standard service interaction, a 3-second exchange of liquid and pleasantries. But Vanessa, emboldened by my earlier politeness, or perhaps just bored, decided to escalate the game. As I poured the dark roast, watching the steam curl up between us, she reached out. Her hand didn't just brush mine this time. It landed. Her fingers, cool and adorned with silver rings, wrapped around my wrist, halting my movement. It was a trap, a physical anchor, dropping me into her reality and pulling me out of the kitchen's orbit. You really are too good for this place, she murmured, her thumb tracing the tendon of my inner wrist with a familiarity that made my skin crawl. She leaned in closer, invading the airspace over the counter, her eyes locked on mine with a heavy, suggestive liddedness. I could get you a job at my firm. Front desk, better hours, better pay. She paused for effect, letting the offer hang there, dripping with implication. Think about it, sweetheart. The word didn't just land. It detonated. Sweetheart. It was a casual endearment, a throwaway term people used a dozen times a day without thinking. But the way Vanessa said it, low, possessive, with a sticky, intimate weight, changed the molecular structure of the air in the diner. It was a claim. It was a mark. And instantly, the world behind me stopped. The rhythmic, violent thwack, thwack, thwack of the knife against the cutting board. The sound that had been the heartbeat of the kitchen for the last 4 hours. Cut off. It wasn't a gradual slowing down. It was a hard stop, as if someone had severed the power cord to the universe. The quiet that rushed in was absolute, heavier than the roar of the exhaust hood. It was a vacuum, sucking the oxygen right out of my lungs. I didn't want to turn around. I knew, with a terrifying, visceral certainty, what I would find. But the silence demanded acknowledgement. I slowly pulled my wrist from Vanessa's grip, a movement that felt like wading through molasses, and turned toward the pass. Rosalie was frozen. She stood at her station, the santoku knife suspended inches above a pile of red peppers. She wasn't moving. She wasn't breathing. Her entire body had gone rigid, the muscles in her forearms locked tight, the tendons in her neck straining against the collar of her chef's coat. But it was her eyes that stopped my heart. She wasn't looking at the ticket rail. She wasn't looking at the prep. She wasn't even looking at my face. She was staring at my wrist. Her gaze was fixed on the exact spot where Vanessa's fingers had just been. It was a look of such concentrated, volatile intensity that I actually felt the phantom heat of it on my skin. It wasn't professional irritation. It wasn't the annoyance of a chef distracted during a rush. It was primal. It was the look of someone watching a thief reach for their property. Her eyes were dark, dilated, and absolutely unflinching. She looked like she was mentally dissecting the interaction, peeling back the layers of time to find the moment the line was crossed so she could burn it out of existence. In that frozen second, the confusion that had been clouding my head all morning evaporated, replaced by a sharp, thrilling clarity. The coldness, the tension, the silent treatment. It wasn't because I was slow on the uptake or because the produce delivery was late. It was this. It was her. I felt the realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Rosalie, the woman who corrected table settings by millimeters, who controlled her kitchen with the icy detachment of a surgeon, was unraveling because another woman had called me sweetheart. The jealousy radiating off her was palpable, a physical texture in the air, rough, hot, and dangerous. It was terrifying, yes, because Rosalie in a rage was a force of nature. But beneath the fear, a sudden electric heat bloomed in my stomach. She was possessive. She was furious. And she couldn't look away. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. The kitchen was a tableau of suspended violence. Rosalie's knuckles were white around the handle of her knife. Her gaze finally flicked up from my wrist to my eyes, and for a fraction of a second, the mask was gone completely. I saw the raw, naked want there, the terrified fury of someone realizing they have no claim over the thing they desire most. It was an expression of absolute vulnerability, wrapped in aggression. Then the spell broke. Rosalie blinked, the shutter slamming down over her eyes. She spun on her heel, turning her back to the pass with a violent, jerky motion. She grabbed a heavy sauté pan from the rack and slammed it onto the gas burner with a force that rattled the plates on the shelf. Clang! The metal screamed against the cast iron grate. "Service!" she barked, her voice rough and cracked, shouting for a runner who wasn't there, completely ignoring the fact that there was no food in the window to run. She just needed to make noise. She needed to break the silence before it suffocated us both. The temperature in the kitchen didn't actually drop. If anything, with the ovens blasting at 500 degrees and the salamander glowing angry red, it was hotter than ever. But the atmosphere instantly plunged into a deep Arctic freeze. That slamming pan was a demarcation line. Before it, we were partners, 2 halves of a seamless whole moving through the chaos. After it, Rosalie retreated into the role of head chef like it was a concrete bunker, and I was left standing on the outside, shivering in the sudden, violent exposure. The rhythm we had perfected over months of service didn't just stumble, it shattered. The fluid, intuitive movement was replaced by jagged, sharp angles. Rosalie stopped anticipating my movements. She became an obstacle, a rigid statue of white linen and resentment that I had to navigate around. When I stepped into the line to grab a side of dressing, she didn't pivot to give me space. She stood her ground, forcing me to squeeze past the hot steel of the pass, minimizing contact, as if my touch had suddenly become corrosive. The telepathy was gone, severed at the source. Instead of the silent handoffs and the intuitive rhythm, she began to use her voice. And it was a weapon. "Runner," she barked, not using my name, not looking up from the garnish station. "Table 4 is dying in the window." The food had been there for 6 seconds. I grabbed the plates, the ceramic hot against my fingertips, and risked a glance at her. "I've got it, Rosalie." "Chef," she corrected, her voice flat and stripped of every ounce of the morning's earlier warmth. She was slicing avocados with surgical, terrifying precision, her eyes fixed on the blade. In the kitchen, it's Chef. The correction stung more than a slap. For a year, I had been the only person allowed to use her first name during service. It was our secret handshake, the verbal token of our shared 4 a.m. world. To have it revoked so casually, right after the sweetheart incident, felt like a door being slammed in my face. She was reestablishing the hierarchy, building a wall of professional protocol to hide the raw, messy jealousy I had seen in her eyes just moments before. The punishment continued in 1,000 tiny, excruciating cuts. She scrutinized details she usually ignored. A smudge on a rim, the angle of a napkin. "Focus on your job," she snapped, her eyes hard and opaque, shutting me out completely. "Not on your social life." The accusation hung there, heavy and unfair. She wasn't mad about the stacking. She was mad that I had let Vanessa touch me. She was punishing me for the fact that she had lost her composure, and instead of admitting it, she was burying us both under a landslide of petty authority. I felt a sudden, sharp ache in my chest, the loss of her gravity. I was used to being the center of her focus, the thing she stabilized. Now, I was just an employee she couldn't wait to be rid of. As the morning wore on, the adrenaline of the rush began to fade, draining away to leave us stranded in the wreckage. The tickets slowed, the dining room thinned out, the frantic noise of the service died down, but the comfortable silence of the early morning didn't return to take its place. Instead, a thick, suffocating tension filled the room. We moved around the kitchen in a quiet standoff, the air between us charged with everything we were refusing to say. The air in the kitchen had become pressurized, dense enough to distort light and sound. It was unsustainable. You can't work in a vacuum. Eventually, the containment fails. My hands, usually steady enough to pour a rosette in the latte during an earthquake, felt clumsy and disconnected from my brain. I was vibrating with the aftershocks of her anger, hyper-aware of her presence just 3 feet away, slicing lemons with relentless, rhythmic violence. I was clearing the counter, a stack of side plates balanced in my left hand, a bus tub in my right. I moved toward the dish pit, navigating the narrow straight between the pass and the prep table. I should have called behind. I didn't. I was too afraid of her voice, too afraid of another chef thrown like a stone. I tried to ghost past her, but as I lined up my hip with the corner of the stainless steel, Rosalie turned. She didn't bump me, we didn't touch, but the sudden movement, the flash of white linen in my peripheral vision, made me flinch. The stack of plates shifted. I overcorrected. Gravity took over. The crash was spectacular. 3 ceramic saucers hit the quarry tile and detonated, sending shards of white shrapnel skittering across the floor, sliding under the lowboys and bouncing off the rubber mats. The sound was a jagged tear in the oppressive silence, shocking and loud. "Jesus Christ!" Rosalie snapped, the words exploding out of her before the echo of the crash had even faded. She slammed her knife down. "Pay attention!" I dropped to my knees instantly, my face burning, frantic to erase the evidence of my clumsiness. "I've got it," I stammered, my hands shaking as I reached for a large, jagged triangle of ceramic near her boot. "I'm sorry, I just—" "Don't!" Her voice changed mid-syllable, shifting from anger to a sharp, panicked command. I froze. Before I could process the shift, she was there. She didn't walk around the line. She vaulted the mental barrier between us and dropped into a crouch beside me. Suddenly, the world narrowed down to a 3-foot square of dirty tile and the overwhelming reality of her. The kitchen vanished. The hum of the fridge faded. There was only the heat radiating from her chef's coat, the scent of vanilla and sweat now overpowering the smell of the floor cleaner, and the electric proximity of her body. We were knee to knee, thigh to thigh, huddled over the broken pieces like it was a crime scene. I reached for the shard again, desperate to do something, to be useful, to fix the mess I'd made. Her hand shot out. She didn't grab the plate. She grabbed me. Her fingers wrapped around my wrist, my right wrist, the exact same spot Vanessa had claimed an hour ago. But this wasn't a flirtatious graze. This was an anchor. Her grip was firm, calloused, and hot, her thumb pressing hard against my pulse point, grounding me. "Stop," she breathed, her voice dropping to a rough whisper that vibrated in my chest. "You'll cut yourself. It's sharp." She wasn't looking at the glass. She was staring at her own hand wrapped around my wrist, watching the way her pale skin looked against mine. The contact was electric, a live wire connecting two systems that were overloaded. I could feel the tremor in her fingers, not fear, but restraint. She was holding on to me like she was afraid that if she let go, I would drift away entirely. I stopped breathing. I looked up, tracing the line of her arm to her face. She was looking down, her lashes casting long shadows on her cheeks. Then, slowly, she lifted her gaze. The ice was gone. The chef persona was gone. Her eyes were dark, wide, and filled with a terrifying mixture of apology and hunger. She looked at my mouth, then back to my eyes, and for one suspended, heart-stopping second, I thought she was going to kiss me, right there, on the kitchen floor, surrounded by broken china. The air between us crackled, heavy and sweet. Her thumb stroked my wrist, once, a subconscious caress that felt louder than a scream. Then, the realization hit her. I saw the moment she remembered where we were. I saw the panic fled back in, washing away the vulnerability. Her eyes widened. She looked at her hand on my wrist as if it belonged to someone else, as if it had betrayed her. She released me abruptly, snatching her hand back like she'd been burned. The loss of contact was a physical coldness. She scrambled backward, standing up in a jerky, uncoordinated movement that was completely unlike her. "I'll get the broom," she said, her voice tight and high, addressing the wall. "Don't touch it, just stay there." She turned and marched toward the back office, not the broom closet. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving me kneeling alone in the wreckage, my wrist still burning where she had held it. The day didn't end. It just surrendered. The hours following the incident with the broken plate were a blur of mechanical efficiency, a retreat into the safety of routine where we could hide from each other in plain sight. But eventually, the clock ran out. The last customer, an elderly man nursing a lukewarm tea, finally shuffled out into the afternoon drizzle, and the silence that rushed in to fill his wake wasn't the companionable quiet of our 4 a.m. mornings. This was a stagnant quiet, thick with the residue of everything we hadn't said. I flipped the sign on the door to closed and dimmed the main dining room lights, leaving us in a twilight gloom that felt too intimate for the distance between us. The ritual of closing usually felt like an exhale, a shared release of the day's pressure. Tonight, it felt like holding our breath. I moved to the counter, specifically to the seat near the pass where Vanessa had held court. The ghost of her perfume still lingered there, faint but persistent, a floral irritant under the smell of bleach and coffee grounds. I sprayed the formica with a little more force than necessary. I scrubbed that specific square of laminate as if I could physically erase the memory of the morning, as if friction alone could remove the stain of the word sweetheart from the air. I wanted to scrub away the image of Rosalie's face going rigid, the sound of the pan hitting the burner, and the feeling of her hand on my wrist, that desperate anchoring grip that she had recoiled from as if I were radioactive. The rag moved in tight, angry circles, my own frustration rising to match the heat that had been radiating off the kitchen all day. I was angry at Vanessa for her casual entitlement, yes, but I was angrier at the wall Rosalie had built in the aftermath. We had spent a year building a language without words, and she had silenced it in a single heartbeat because she was too terrified to own her reaction. The click of the back office door opening cut through the sound of my scrubbing. I didn't turn around immediately. I kept my rhythm, the wet slap of the cloth against the counter serving as a metronome. But my entire body tuned itself to her frequency. I heard her footsteps, lighter now. She had changed. When I finally looked up, the breath caught in my throat. Rosalie had shed the armor. The stiff, double-breasted white chef's coat was gone, replaced by a simple, worn black t-shirt that fit close to her skin. It was a transformation that always jarred me. Without the coat, the head chef hierarchy dissolved, leaving just the woman. Her arms were bare, revealing the map of her trade. The small, pale burn scars on her forearms, the definition of muscle earned from lifting stock pots and breaking down sides of beef. Her hair was down, pulled loose from its severe bun, falling in dark waves around her face. She looked exhausted. She looked smaller, somehow, stripped of the professional authority that usually made her 10 feet tall. She held a clipboard, pretending to check the inventory on the dry goods shelf, but her eyes weren't moving. She was using the clipboard as a shield, focusing intensely on a row of canned tomatoes to avoid looking at me. She was trying to wait me out, hoping I would finish my side work, hang up my apron, and walk out the back door so we could preserve the fragile, frozen status quo she had established. But I was done with the cold. I looked at her, the slope of her shoulders, the tension still held in her jaw, and I realized I couldn't do it. I couldn't come back tomorrow and pretend we were just colleagues. I couldn't go back to the dance, knowing that she had looked at me with that terrified, possessive hunger and then slammed the door in my face. The silence wasn't protecting us anymore. It was rotting us. I tossed the rag into the sanitizer bucket. The splash echoed in the empty room. Rosalie flinched, her shoulders tightening, but she didn't turn. I walked to the front door. The sound of my footsteps was loud on the tile. I reached for the deadbolt, my hand closing over the cold metal thumb turn. This was the point of no return. Locking the door usually meant the end of the shift, the separation. Tonight, it meant containment. I turned the lock. The heavy steel bolt slid home with a definitive metallic thud that resonated through the room like a gavel strike. Rosalie finally looked up. The sound of the lock had broken her concentration. She turned slowly, the clipboard lowering to her side. Her eyes met mine across the dim expanse of the dining room, wide and wary, like an animal realizing the cage door has just been shut. I didn't reach for my coat. I didn't reach for my bag. I stood with my back to the locked door, blocking the exit, and crossed my arms. The air between us charged instantly, the static returning, but this time I wasn't going to let her ground it out. "We're not doing this," I said, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. "We're not leaving this kitchen until you tell me what the hell happened today." "Open the door," Rosalie said. Her voice was low, a warning rumble that usually sent line cooks scrambling for cover. She didn't look at me. She was staring at the deadbolt as if she could dismantle it with telekinesis. "No. This is kidnapping. It's unprofessional. You stopped being professional at 9:35 this morning," I countered, stepping away from the door and moving into the room. I walked slowly, deliberately, closing the 30 feet of checkerboard tile between us. "You stopped being professional the second you decided to punish me for doing my job." Rosalie finally turned her head. Her eyes were dark, shadowed by the dim emergency lighting that bathed the diner in a sepia gloom. "I was maintaining standards," she lied. The lie was so thin it was insulting. She crossed her arms over her chest, a defensive posture that looked wrong on her, too small. "The service was disjointed. You were distracted. You allowed a customer to monopolize your time during a rush." "I allowed a regular to order coffee," I said, stopping at the corner of the counter, just out of reach. "I was polite. That's the job. It wasn't disjointed until you started slamming pans." "I didn't slam." "You threw a tantrum, Rosalie. You went cold. You treated me like a stranger." I took another step. The air in the empty diner felt thin, charged with the static of a thunderstorm that refused to break. And it wasn't about the coffee. It wasn't about the rush. It was about her. Rosalie's jaw tightened. She looked away, focusing on the chrome napkin dispenser. "I don't care about your friends. She's not my friend. And you don't care about the service standards either. You care that she touched me." Rosalie flinched. It was small, a microspasm in her shoulder. But in the stillness, it looked like a shiver. "That's what it was, wasn't it?" I pushed, my voice dropping, softening, probing the wound. She put her hand on my arm. She leaned in. She called me. "Don't," Rosalie snapped. The word cracked like a whip. She looked at me then, and the composure was fracturing, hairline cracks spreading across the porcelain mask of the head chef. "Don't say it." She called me sweetheart. "Stop it!" The shout echoed off the tile walls, harsh and violent. Rosalie took a step toward me, closing the distance, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. The anger was finally breaking the surface, hot and molten. "You think I wanted to see that?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a rage that rattled and thrilled me. "You think I wanted to stand there, trapped behind that line, and watch her put her hands on you? Watch her lean into your space like she belonged there? like she had the right. It was just a hand on an arm, Rosalie. It was a claim! She slammed her hand onto the counter, not in violence, but in desperation. She touched you casually, easily. She touched you like it was nothing. She let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. And I went rigid. I couldn't move. I felt like I was watching someone break into my house and take the only thing that mattered, and I was paralyzed. She looked at me, her chest heaving, the black t-shirt rising and falling with her rapid breathing. The air vibrated with the confession. She hadn't just admitted to jealousy. She had admitted to a visceral, crippling possessiveness that had nothing to do with professional boundaries. I hated her, Rosalie whispered, the anger draining away to leave something raw and exposed in its wake. In that moment, I hated her perfectly manicured hands. I hated her voice. I hated that she could say that word to you, right in front of me, and I couldn't say anything because I'm just your boss. I'm just the chef. Is that all you are? I asked. I took the final step. We were standing in the narrow aisle between the counter and the tables, the space where customers usually walked, but now it was just us. The distance was gone. I could see the pulse jumping in the hollow of her throat. I could smell the vanilla and the faint, metallic scent of the kitchen that clung to her hair. Rosalie looked down at me, her eyes searching my face, tracing the line of my jaw, my lips. The fury was gone, transmuted by the heat of the moment into something else entirely. The tension that had been a wall all day was suddenly a bridge. I don't know, she admitted, her voice rough, barely audible in the quiet room. I don't know what I am to you. But I know that when she touched you, I wanted to burn the kitchen down just to make it stop. You didn't have to burn anything, I said, reaching out. My hand hovered between us for a second, a question asked in the dark. Then I placed it on her arm, right over the faint white scar on her forearm. Her skin was burning hot. You just had to tell me. Rosalie looked at my hand on her arm. She didn't pull away this time. She didn't freeze. She watched my fingers against her skin with a kind of reverent, starving intensity. When she looked back up, the vulnerability in her eyes was devastating. I couldn't, she breathed. Because if I told you, I wouldn't be able to stop. Then don't stop. The air between us compressed, heavy and electric. The sweetheart incident, the cold shoulder, the broken plate, it all led here, to this terrifying, inevitable gravity. Rosalie made a sound, low in her throat, a surrender to the pull. She moved, not with the sharp, precise movements of the chef, but with the desperate, fluid motion of a woman who has been starving for months. Her hand came up, trembling slightly, and her fingers brushed my cheek. It was the first intentional touch she had ever given me, and it felt like an earthquake. Her thumb traced the line of my jaw, the skin of her palm rough and calloused against my cheek. It was a study, a correction of alignment, but entirely personal this time. The terrifying control she exerted over her kitchen was trembling in her hands, vibrating with the sheer effort of holding back the flood. I can't, she whispered, her voice cracking, stripped of all that professional authority. I can't watch anyone else touch you. Not like that. Not ever again. Then don't, I breathed, leaning into her touch. Make sure they know. The distance closed. It wasn't tentative. Rosalie didn't do tentative. She moved with the same terrifying certainty she brought to the line, reclaiming the territory she felt she'd lost. Her other hand found a small of my back, pulling me in until there was no air left between us, her body pressing against mine with a desperate, solid weight. When she kissed me, it wasn't a movie moment. It was an impact. It was precise, unflinching, and possessive. It felt like the release of a pressurized valve, months of 4 a.m. silence and accidental brushes colliding in a single heated second. She kissed me like she was starving, like she was angry at the time we'd wasted, like she was trying to scrub the memory of Vanessa's hand off my skin with her own. There was no hesitation, only the overwhelming sensory reality of her, the taste of dark roast coffee, the scent of vanilla and kitchen heat, the absolute demand of her mouth moving against mine. I held onto her shoulders, grounding myself against the storm. The diner around us, the stack of unpaid bills, the smell of sanitizer, the hum of the fridge, faded into a dull background noise. There was only the friction of her body, the grip of her hands, and the sudden, terrifying realization that the dance was over. We weren't colleagues navigating a narrow aisle anymore. We were a collision. I felt the precise texture of her intention in the kiss, a silent promise that the cold front was gone, replaced by a heat that threatened to consume us both. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless, chest heaving in the quiet room. The silence that rushed back in wasn't heavy anymore. It was electric, charged with a new frequency. Rosalie rested her forehead against mine, her eyes closed, her breathing syncing with mine. Her hands didn't leave my waist. They tightened, as if she was afraid I might vanish if she let go. "This changes everything," she murmured, her voice vibrating against my skin, low and rough. "The line, the prep, the rules. I can't go back to just watching you." "I know," I said, running my thumb over the pulse at her wrist, the same spot she'd grabbed earlier. It was hammering against my skin, a frantic rhythm that matched my own. "We don't go back. We just find a new rhythm." She opened her eyes. Her defenses were gone. There was no head chef looking at me, just Rosalie. She looked shaken and relieved and beautiful, stripped of her armor in the dim light of the dining room. "A new rhythm," she repeated, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time that day. It wasn't the sharp smile of a successful service. It was soft, private, and entirely ours. I think I can work with that. We walked out into the cool night air together, the neon open sign dark behind us. The professional distance was gone, left on the kitchen floor with the shards of the broken plate, replaced by something terrified, messy, and real. As I locked the door, her hand found mine in the dark, interlocking fingers, a new, perfect alignment. If you've ever felt the electric weight of a line finally being crossed, subscribe for more stories like this.